You know, when you hear politicians talk about our spending problems, they're really talking about one thing: entitlements, like Social Security, Medicare, food stamps, unemployment benefits. I could spend the next 20 minutes listing the different programs, but I think you get the point. Now, here's the thing. If I gave you a choice between working for $400 a week or sitting on your couch and eating TV dinners and collecting $350 from the government, which would you choose? Now, what we've seen in the past 4 years under President Obama is an explosion in the welfare state. It's grown by nearly 19% overall. Food stamps, record high. 47 million are on food stamps, or 1/6 of Americans are receiving welfare. How about health care? Premiums for a family have risen to nearly $16,000 a year. You know, I thought Obamacare promised to lower the costs. And here's the kicker. Even after all this government welfare spending, the poverty rate is a whopping 15%, with a record number of people living in poverty. It boils down to this: personal responsibility and the welfare state cannot coexist. And if you haven't figured it out yet, America, we've got a big problem on our hands. Here to tell us how to fix it are research fellow from the Heartland Institute, Ben Domenech, and senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Robert Rector, who joins us from Washington, D.C. I don't mean to sound like a meanie here, but...
I know you're not a meanie.
No, I'm a pretty nice guy.
Yeah.
But we have seen the failure of this idea that the government can bring programs, or I should say elements of our lives, into their jurisdiction, but convince us that $1 in is going to be $1 out when we get it back, whether it's Medicaid or Medicare. Medicaid, unfortunately, is not paid for by its recipients.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that we see in all of these programs is this bias toward the idea, as you say, that there's no damage done when you give people a redistributed tax dollar from somebody else. What we actually know from experience, and virtually every study that sort of looks at this, bears this out, is that the people who are within these programs, number one, they become less likely to ever get off the program again. Social Security, disability, if you get on that, only about 2% of people ever get off that again. And we see them trapped in these programs that actually deliver really poor outcomes. So it doesn't even serve the populations it's supposed to serve well. And instead, they end up trapped in these programs for decades, and typically for the rest of their lives, ending up on the government dole with other taxpayers paying for them. It's really a terrible situation.
Robert, tell me if I'm right about this, that whether it's food stamps or welfare, that when the government redistributes wealth, when it takes money from someone who earns it and gives it to someone who doesn't earn it to go out and spend it. Now, I know Nancy Pelosi thinks this is the greatest way to stimulate an economy. You give people free money, they spend it, everybody's happy, except you're taking it from the productive forces and you're giving it to the unproductive forces without increasing supply, which raises prices for everyone.
Well, I think the real impact is that we're really spending so much on welfare that we can't afford it, and most of the means-tested programs that aid the poor basically are designed to discourage work and to penalize marriage, and therefore they essentially generate a need for even more spending in future generations. Most people know that Social Security and Medicare are very large. Very few people understand that for every dollar we spend on Social Security and Medicare, we're spending 75 cents on aid to the poor, mainly through programs that discourage work and actually penalize marriage. All those things really have to be changed. I think the public really does want to support people who are truly in need, but we need to find a way to support them that doesn't, in fact, just generate more need in the future.
Well, we've been spending on the war on poverty officially since 1964. I've got a chart here based on your research that shows the massive growth in welfare spending since the 1960s. Right. If the idea was to combat poverty with government programs, and we've spent about $15 trillion, inflation adjusted, since 1964, well, we've spent the money, we still have poverty. It's not working.
Yeah, and that's because all of these programs violate the initial idea, the war on poverty. When Johnson launched the war on poverty, he said that he wanted to deal not merely with the symptoms of poverty, but the causes. And what he meant by that is he wanted to make people productive so that they were able to earn enough that they wouldn't be poor. He actually promised that the war on poverty would reduce welfare dependence, and he said the goal was to turn the poor from tax eaters into taxpayers. Now, the thing has basically been completely turned around, and we've absolutely abandoned that idea of promoting self-sufficiency and replaced it with an idea that we want to maximize the amount of free handouts that people get. I think what we really need to do is go back to that original vision and say, look, if you're an able-bodied adult getting any type of assistance from the government at all, particularly welfare assistance, you ought to be required to work or prepare for work or at least look for a job in a supervised way. When you do that, the number of people who are interested in getting welfare goes down dramatically. More important, 95% of the Americans, including 95% of Democrats, believe that able-bodied welfare recipients ought to be required to work or prepare for work if they get any type of welfare assistance. That will control costs. It will be beneficial to the recipient because you're helping them rejoin society, and it's much fairer to the taxpayer.
No, that'd be like putting a work requirement in welfare reform and then expecting people sooner or later will get off it. We've seen what happened with that. Now, back to health care spending.
Yes.
When you look at Medicaid, it adds to the demand side, but it doesn't create any doctors.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking about prices going up for everyone, the more the government loads the demand side, but doesn't add anything to the supply side. And then you get doctors who don't even take Medicaid, so who's really being helped here?
And what happens is that providers have to essentially squeeze everyone who's in the private marketplace in order to make up for what they're losing by taking all these underpaid.
Hospital losses.
Exactly. And that's why you see premiums going up and things of that nature. I want to go back, Robert talked about how this disincentivizes success. Let's take, for example, a woman who has 2 kids, a single mom who's trying to make ends meet. The point where she should actually stop earning money is now $29,000. Essentially, that's the point where all these various things cut in that cut her off from access to government aid for all sorts of different things. Think about how much that disincentivizes success. It says to somebody, you shouldn't take that raise. You shouldn't take, your employer says, I'm going to give you another $500, another $1,000 because you've been working well. Well, I shouldn't take that because I'm relying on free money from the government, and that's a lot more reliable in this economy. That has a horrible effect on success and, in the long term, on any family or any single mom who's in this position.